Hello and welcome to Manx Radio. I'm our election producer, Amy Griffiths, and this is our general election candidate interview series. On Thursday, the 24th of September, you'll get to have your say in who'll be representing you in the House of Keys for the next 5 years. Before that, we've asked all those standing to take part in a 30-minute interview to help you make up your mind. Up next is Peter Washington, who's standing in Douglas North. He's been speaking to Phil Gawne.
Falcherugus Rias Cadge and Shears Feed. Today I'm talking to Peter Washington, who's standing for the first time in the constituency of Douglas North. And the obvious first question that I've been asking all the candidates, a gentle lob question. Why do you want to be an MHK? What's motivated you to stand?
Well, morning, Phil, and thanks for inviting me to come and have this chat with you. Why am I standing? Well, I think I've got involved in politics because I think there's certain things have been going wrong in certain areas, and I think somebody's got to have a voice and start speaking up for some of these issues. And everybody in Douglas North will know that I've stood for the local council. I'm a councillor for Douglas North. One of my main issues ever since I've been elected onto council has been social housing. I have been on the City Council Housing and Properties Committee for 5 years now, and I'm actually the chairman. I've been the chairman for nearly 2 years. And it's that issue of people need a voice and that people need somebody to speak up for them, to say how it is, how their lives are being impacted by some of the decisions that are being made. Now, I've been heavily involved in social housing and in Douglas North, and I think there's only a certain amount what I can do through council, and I've reached that limit where if we need to make more changes, I can't do any more in the council. It's got to be in government. It's government policies that are driving social housing. And I think one of the other issues is it's not just social housing, it's a private rented as well. They need a voice because traditionally when they should have been coming into social housing, they're not allowed in. And the council can't do anything about it. So if I can't change it in council, I've got to stand for MHK. I've got to get into that chamber and start speaking there, telling people what it's like.
Douglas City Council, though, is a very large, very well-funded local authority. Obviously the biggest budget of any of the local authorities. Probably, if you combine all the local authorities, they would struggle to beat the Douglas City Council budget. Surely you can do a lot as a Douglas City Councillor.
Well, we do have the biggest budget. I mean, we have more social housing in Douglas than there are actual properties in, I think it's Port St Mary. We have more social housing than the rest of the other areas put together. But there's a bit of a saying in the City Council when it comes to housing that as chairman of the housing committee, if I want to blow my nose, I've got to ask permission of the government to get my hanky out. We have a big budget. The budget that we collect for rates in Douglas is over £14 million. The money that we collect in rents and everything associated with that is 15 million. So there are some big budgets, but I think people need to recognise what they collect in rent cannot be spent on ratepayers' issues. And what we collect in rates cannot be spent on social housing. Social housing can fund itself if it's not being tweaked and manipulated by government. And that's the kind of issue that I want to do. We want to bring back social housing back under the control of the City Council.
And one of the things that you perhaps controversially have said is, and you've just repeated it there, is that this social housing can pay for itself. That can only happen if rents are increased, though, surely.
Well, at the moment, you see, with Douglas Council, we can't even put the rent up. It's the government that sets the rents. And for years, they've been keeping it lower than what the inflation rate is and what we should have been doing. Now, my theory on that is when the government are looking at the rents, what they're looking at, 20% of people in social housing are on housing benefit. And I think what the government have been doing is if they put the rents up, it's going to put the housing benefit budget up. And that's what they've been looking at. And that's completely wrong because now we've ended up where we've got this deficit. So there's deficit of... The deficit is a lot of smoke and mirrors that's controlled by the government, if they don't give us enough, they don't put the rent up enough for us to do what we need to do, and then we end up in a deficit, it's a lose-lose situation. We don't have enough money to do the maintenance. And at the same time, they're saying, because you've got a deficit, we don't want you to spend any more money. So we've got to get out of this deficit. If we were actually paying rent to cover all the costs, what we should be doing is at the end of the year, we should be in a surplus. If we were in a surplus, we could invest that then into building more social housing.
So how much more of a rent would you be expecting tenants to pay then?
There's lots of various things. Some people say it can be as much as £14 per week. Now, when we're talking about this, we need to get the actual figures. I've asked for those figures through council. I've asked for what would the financial implications be, but I've also asked what the legal aspect is to withdraw from the government policy, because it's got that serious. But
I guess at £14 a week, that's still going to be substantially cheaper than the private sector.
It might well be, but this is where it's got to be to a point where it's got to be. Those increases have got to be justified as well. At the moment, they're not being justified, because with them having that deficit, whatever goes on that deficit, we've got no control over. So again, it's bringing it back, the control back into Douglas Council. But one of the things that I've got to say on this isn't just me that's saying this. Douglas Council has a 10-year plan. This is in the 10-year plan to get off this deficit so that we can get into a surplus, so we don't have to keep asking government to bail us out, or to for us to start projects to build more social housing. That is the issue. It's a multifaceted issue. So it's part of our 10-year plan to go down this route, to be self-sufficient again. It never used to be like this, and we've got to get back so that Douglas Council can control it. This £14 a week, some people, I don't know if that's factual until I actually see the numbers from the financial director of Douglas Council. That's when we'll know. And
of course, it'll depend on, presumably, people in single-bed flats will be paying less extra than people in larger properties.
There's lots of issues on that as well, yeah.
Okay. You're very proudly standing for the Manx Labour Party. What's the reason for doing that?
The Manx Labour Party, I've always been a trade union activist. Ever since I started work, I've been in the trade union. And being part of that collective gives you the opportunity that when you have your meetings, that you can discuss things and you can get a wide view on an issue coming from different perspectives. And I think that gives you a broader base to know what you're talking about. It also tests what you're talking about. So when you get a group of people who are like-minded, who want to make some changes, you can. It's always better to be doing it with a group of people that understand what the problems are. And being part of that collective group, it's a big opportunity to learn other people's points of view. And anybody can join the Labour Party, anybody can come down and take part in those conversations, and that's what it is. And I think we have so many healthy discussions about a full range of topics. No one person can be an expert on everything. And I think having that draw on other people who have expertise in other areas has got to be a benefit for us as individuals, but it gives us strength in a group.
The one thing, because you've shared with me your personal manifesto, which talks about the housing crisis, tenants' rights, education, health, and then says why you. What it doesn't talk about is the substantial gap between government expenditure and government income. It doesn't tell us how you and the Manx Labour Party are going to fill that spending black hole. It doesn't tell us anything about how you would intend to grow the economy. So perhaps there is more waiting to be released on that.
When you're talking about growing the economy, and especially the local economy, a lot of the issues, if we can sort the housing crisis out, we can sort out a lot of the other issues that go along with that. One of the reasons that people aren't spending money in the local economy is because they haven't got it. Because everybody's paying so much more in rent or mortgages. Mortgages now, are getting to the state where it's, nearly 10 times your average earnings, your yearly earnings. What you're paying back now is over 35 years, not 25 years. So you don't have that kind of income spur to spend on anything. So on average, a private renter is spending about 33% of their income. Now, then if you've got an energy, the cost of energy and the cost of food and everything else going on, there's nothing else left. You've got social housing renters there to spend at 20%, 27% on their rent. And again, if you're on low income, by the time you've paid all that and you've got energy and food, you can see why people have been struggling. Householders spend 22% of income on their mortgages. But those things are only going to increase if we do nothing. So my idea is, and a lot of other people, if we had affordable housing and we had affordable rents and we brought those percentages down, people would have enough money in their pocket to go out and have a meal at the weekend. But at the moment, people just can't afford to go out and spend any money. So a lot of the issues that we've got all revolve around housing and the cost of housing. So if we fix the housing issue and the problems that we've got, we might stand a chance on the local economy.
I mean, you talk about tenant rights, and indeed this has been something that has been being talked about. I mean, it was being talked about even when I was in the House of Keys, and that's over 10 years ago now. The problem with introducing tenants' rights legislation, of course, is that you end up with perhaps people who maybe shouldn't be landlords deciding that they want to leave the market because it's no longer worth their while being landlords. That actually, whereas the tenants that still have places to rent do better because they have more rights, there's fewer properties available, and there's already quite a lack of property available for people to live in at the moment. So how are you going to overcome a potential rush to the door from landlords by introducing some of this legislation?
Well, this is something that's just recently happened in England, isn't it? They've brought in tenants' rights so that everybody has a long-term tenancy. And I think what we need more than anything when we're looking at tenants, housing, it should be secure, affordable, and it should be for all citizens, and it should be a fundamental right. To do nothing, this situation is going to get worse. So to have fundamental rights, we need legislation. So hopefully, yes, I will be talking about bringing in long-term tenancies, not just for social housing, but for all private rented as well. There will be a time when there is a transitional period, but I think unless we do it, we're not going to sort out this housing crisis. It's only going to get worse. And I think there will be some people that will be lobbying saying there's going to be a negative impact to it, but we have to ride that storm.
What do you think the purpose of MHKs is? What's the fundamental role about?
For me, I'm not going in there saying that I've got all the answers for everything. What I see is that you've got 24 people in there and they're going to have a debate and a discussion about certain issues. And my aim is to give the perspective of what it's like to be a tenant, social housing tenant or a private rented tenant. And some people, when they're doing these discussions, they'll be looking at finding their information from all sorts of different places. I'll be speaking from somebody who lives that life, somebody that who is a tenant, and speaking on behalf of those people. And I think some of the nuances and some of the impact that changes and some of the legislation have gone through, the unintentional consequences of not having things discussed proper, I think my role there is as much to not only just stand up for tenants, but to try and educate the other people to what the impact is of what the decision that they're making.
And I think you're kind of specifically looking at the private or the rental market, but I mean the question I suppose was a broader one. What is that fundamental role of an MHK? What are you there for?
We're there to stand up for the people and make sure that government is working for the people. And it's to build consensus with the other 24, well, the other 23 that get in, is to work together on some of those issues. We're going to have people from all walks of life going in there. And like I said before, not everybody can be an expert in everything. But if we've got experts around there that people then can educate other people and see other people's point of view, I think it's going to be, hopefully it will be a case of building up trust with other people with a view as the government has got to start working for the people. And I think sometimes we've had the government working for the government, not the people.
Education, then, you talk about education, and you say that the island has a history of lack of inclusion for neurodiverse children in the education system. All children should have equal opportunities to reach their full potential. This is adding to the costs, obviously, of providing an education system.
I've been involved in this for over 20 years when my kids were at school. I'm dyslexic. I didn't find out till I was 43. It had a huge impact on me. So it is somewhat close to my heart. But ever since my children were in the education system, when neurodiversity comes in and you go up to your school, you're just hit by a brick wall. The Department of Education for years have been saying they don't recognise dyslexia. And what they're doing is they're playing for time with children's lives by waiting and putting excuses up of not to do anything because they know within 4 or 5 years they're going to leave that school. Now, within the Department of Education, I spoke to some people and they say they've been at this for 20 years and they've got 20 years experience. Department of Education hasn't got 20 years of experience. It's got 1 year's experience 20 times. Now, you more than anybody will know that when the budget is set and the Department of Education has got their allowance, that's it. And when the MHKs came for the last 20 years have been voting on the budget, they couldn't alter it. It's already been preset. We know now a couple of months ago that all changed. In future, when the budget's coming, they're going to get it 6 weeks in advance. They're going to be able to discuss it out of the chamber with anybody who they want to do, and they can also start making amendments to it. Now, that's not happened for a lot of years, and that's the biggest thing that this government has done, that they've actually, right at nearly the end of the term. So what that means to me is, in the past, departments like education, they ain't going to change anything because they haven't got the budget to do it. But don't stand up and say we haven't got the budget. They talk round it as like find any other excuse. But the actual reason why neurodiversity hasn't been treated in our schools is because they haven't got a budget for it. And you said before, where are we going to have to find this money from? Well, sometimes, I keep hearing that, we're a low-tax jurisdiction, but we can't be a first-world country on third-world tax. And it's as simple as that. And it might mean that we've got to start looking at other areas. If we want all our children to be educated, it is going to cost us money. And we're going to have to find that money from somewhere. Unfortunately, we can't tax the working man anymore because we're taxing him to the hilt. And if it means that we're going to start looking at some other tax streams like they have in the UK, I think to educate our children, and I'm sure you're going to mention health. My view on health is exactly the same. The budget is preset before anything. You can't change it now. Coming up in future, you can change it. The health service hasn't been running over budget. It's been underfunded. Now, if we're going to fund education and health and even housing, you're going to have to find that money from somewhere. And it's going to be a very difficult decisions to have to be made. But somebody's got to make those decisions that we're going to have to say, well, we are going to have to raise taxes and start looking at some of the other tax streams.
And what sort of things are you looking at there?
Well, one of the things that I found really obscure, that one of the housing officers in the council was saying to me is we've got too many people in social housing who are business owners. They pay themselves a minimum wage, and then 2 or 3 times a year they pay themselves a dividend. And then that way, because that's not taxed, the council can't find out about it and they can't put their rent up. Well, if they're not paying tax on dividends like that, maybe we should be looking at tax all income. If you're earning an income and we have income tax, maybe we should start looking at some of those streams. And I think broader along the line, there might be some other things will come to light, and I'm sure other people of a socialist background like me, they would be able to come up with some of those things. But I think in future, when the budget comes up and we haven't got enough, we're going to be turning around to the Treasury and saying, you're going to have to find this money.
Isn't it, though, always the case that the big spending departments, I mean, you've mentioned some of them, education and health, but of course housing, I suppose, sits under DOI. DOI is another big spending department that I think most people who have considered the matter would say isn't properly funded. That's why the infrastructure in the island is in the far from ideal condition that it's in. But the problem is, despite many years of trying, the deficit doesn't seem to have been addressed. I suppose your solution is to tax your way out of the problem.
I would say it's like I've said before. If you want education, if you want health, if you want the police, the fire brigade, you want all these things. They've got to be paid for. And I think sometimes we're going to have to bite the bullet, and we're going to have to look at some of these other streams. I'm the chairman of the Municipal Association, and we meet every month. And when we talk in there, what people pay in rates around the island varies so much. And as chairman of the Municipal Association, I know they'll all be listening at this, and the hue and cry we're going to get from this is because people quite often talk about, should we have an all-island rate? And I think that kind of discussion we're going to have to put on the table. People outside of Douglas don't want it. People in Douglas, because of the rates that they pay, paying far more than anybody else, is saying we need to look at this. Are we going to get the turkeys to vote for Christmas? It's going to have to be a conversation that we're going to have to look at, because I think if we're going to start putting social housing back to those local authorities, they're going to need some extra funding to do some of the other things that need doing. And I think we're going to have to start looking at the rate system. The rate system, we either scrap or we have to modernise it. So effectively, rate reform is a way forward that you're describing here. I mean, I'll play devil's advocate. What the local authorities around the rest of the island will say is that they are delivering the services that they are expected to deliver, that they are statutorily required to deliver, and they're doing it an awful lot cheaper than Douglas City Council. Yeah, I think we've got to recognise that rates isn't payment for services. Rates are a tax on property. And I think if we're starting to look at it that way, that's what there is a misconception, is that you're paying rates for a service. You're not. Rates are a tax on property. That is the system that we, and that's why we're in the mess, because that's been allowed to propagate that we're paying for services, and it's not. It's just another way of taxing wealth, and that again is, we either scrap it and do away with it because it's not working, or we've got to make some of them tough decisions. And I think as well is when we're starting talking about rate reform as well, we're going to have to start looking at economies of scale of what actually it is that they are doing. But I also think that we've got to think about the people that we're electing into local government. Every time that we're having elections, we cannot get people to stand because they've got no power. They can't do anything. You've got to give the people the power in their areas to make a contribution to change, to make the environment and the society that they're living in better. Under the present system, they're not doing anything, and that's why people aren't standing.
Okay, I mean, I think that Douglas City Council seems to do quite a lot. I think looking around the rest of the island, local authorities seem to do a lot. Is it not more of a perception, would you say, that you don't have the ability to do things, or when push comes to shove, the things that you can do as a local authority aren't that important? Is that maybe the...
Well, let's look at it another way. The government in Tynwald is spending so many times discussing such trivial things. How can we have it that an MHK can stand up and ask for all the details on what it's going to cost and the time it's going to take to tarmac a road going to St Michael's Island. That should be done by a local government. Tynwald should be discussing the main issues, the housing crisis, education, health. And what they should be doing is a lot of that kind of impact, those low-level impacts, those things that only impact local areas, that should be given back to those local authorities. Now, if it means supplying a budget to do it with it as well, that's got to be worked out. But I think when you look back at what I've been listening to Tynwald all this year, and I despair sometimes at some of the questions that are being asked, and I'm just thinking, why would you? Because if that was in Douglas, that would be a councillor's issue. But at the same time, what I'm finding is that as a councillor and people have got issues, they come to me, especially on social housing. They say they've got this problem and this is what's happening. I go into City Hall and I talk to the officers, and what I get, that's a government policy. We have to follow that, which means that we've got council officers, instead of being accountable to the housing committee, they're accountable to the government. And I think we should, these demarcation points need to be looked at, and they need to, we need to start moving them.
Do you think that between central and local government there is an understanding as to where the line is between local services and central services?
I think every local authorities have got their own view, and DOI, I despair sometimes. If we have a storm and we have a lot of sand and gravel and stones goes over on Douglas Prom, Douglas Council cleaning department are out there as soon as the tide drops and they're cleaning it up. If the storm damage comes over on the other promenades or other areas, it's DOI that goes and does it. We need to have proper marked lines, what is acceptable for national government to do and what is local government to do, and I don't think we have it.
Well, believe it or not, we're almost at the end of this interview. We have just got a couple of minutes left for you to tell us in a nutshell why people should vote for Peter Washington in Douglas North.
Well, one of the reasons that I'm standing is because people in Douglas North asked me to stand as a councillor to start sorting out some of the issues that we've got with social housing and the unfairness that people are facing. And I find that as a councillor and as chairman of the housing committee, I can't even touch the subject because it's all a government policy. So my view is that if we need to make changes for some of these policies that are having a huge impact on people, and these policies that are impacting social housing, there's no appeal system. So when they come to me and I can't go any further, where do they go? There is nowhere to go. So for me, my aim is to stand up for all tenants, whether it's social housing or private rented. And I think we need a voice in Tynwald because all these unintended consequences that we keep getting off MHKs about what policies have been made and what laws have been passed. Instead of waiting till after the law's passed, we need somebody to speak up for them before they are passed and stop them happening in the future. And I think we've got to have people in Tynwald that understand what is local politics and what is national politics. And we need people to start defining why local government is failing and why national government is wasting time on local government issues. And I think having spent the last 5 years in council and spending nearly as much as time in on the municipal association, I've built up a bit of an understanding.
That was Peter Washington, who's standing for election in Douglas North. Also standing in the constituency are David Ashford, Jason Cheetham, Damian Ciappelli, Denis Staunton, Janet Thommeny and Hugo Yates. You can listen back to this interview along with all the others recorded as part of this series shortly after broadcast from your usual podcast provider. And for more information about the general election, you can head to our dedicated election website, which you can find at manxradio.com.